the member from Kitchener Centre.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'd like to just begin by explaining that Bill 5 scares me. Bill 5 scares me primarily because of the lack of transparency with which each one of the items in Bill 5 has been made. And what worries me most is that this becomes another example of leadership across Ontario. So we've centred a lot of our debate on Toronto. We've centred a lot of our debate on what the people here are feeling, those that gathered outside in the sweltering heat to make their voices heard, those that came inside the legislature and interrupted proceedings because that was the only way that they felt that they could be heard. We've spent some time speaking about some of the other areas who had fought for a long time, Mr. Speaker, to elect a regional chair, only to now find out that that will no longer happen. And a lot of the language used on our side of the House has been about the lack of democracy or lack of respect for democracy, as well as the chilling nature of those decisions. So I stand up today and I can't say anything other than the fact that I have to agree. Yesterday, I sat painstakingly reading through Bill 5, and the only thing that I could think about was 1984. There were so many places within this bill where we were being asked or actually obligated to pretend that an election had not already started. We were being obligated to pretend that people hadn't put their names forward already and already started their campaigns. We were being asked to pretend that monetary loss would now be endured by people who had finally had the courage to put their name forward. And between 1984 and my time working at Ryerson in the Diversity Institute under the direction of Dr. Wendy Sukyar, I couldn't help but think about the women, and the racialized women in particular, who had put their names forward to run in Toronto. There are a number of reports and statistics that say if you actually want to diversify positions of power and influence, that women have to be asked more often than the men. That many men, whether they have the experience or the skills or not, will take that leap, will take that chance, because these systems are already set up to allow them to learn on the job. It's not the same thing for a woman, and it's not the same thing for a woman of color. And in fact, I'm pretty sure that it was just the day before we heard that the Premier had made this decision to make all sorts of changes during an election, that the Toronto Star had a number of articles that were written that were actually speaking about the diversity of candidates as something that they had never seen before. That's right. So when we take a step back and we think about the benefits, the pros and cons of putting a bill like this through, I can't help but be reminded of that. I did some research because sometimes I get confused about whether it's 1998 or 2018, and I was checking to see. So George Orwell wrote 1984 in 1949, and one of the best pieces for me was the Ministry of Truth. I feel like that is what we're experiencing right now. So for example, when I read in Schedule 2, nothing in Section 21 or 218.1 limits the power of a municipality referred to in subsection 218.1 or 2 to change the method of selecting its head of council under Section 218 for any regular election after 2018. I start to wonder, why are we focused on 2018, and why am I only regulated to do what the Premier would like now, and then next year I can change my mind, or next election I can change my mind?
Change the rules.
Why are the rules only set at this point? That's the piece that's chilling. I actually wonder if the reason that the government is not hearing the same kinds of criticism is because people are too scared to present that criticism to the government at this time. Yes. I can tell you that being in Kitchener, there are questions that keep coming up about what will happen in Waterloo region, to the point that people are unwilling to say to me, who's supposed to be here to represent their interests, how they're actually feeling about what's going on. They're scared. And if that's the kind of leadership that we have in Ontario, I'm scared because it doesn't allow me to do my job. It took my colleague in Waterloo a number of requests for me to run. And when I finally made the decision to run, had something like this happened midway through the election, I would not be sitting here. I would have likely, Mr. Speaker, thought that that was a sign that I shouldn't run. And I have to say that I can add something now that I'm here to this debate. So that would be a loss for the province. And I'm not saying that from a place of ego. I'm saying that from my experience in orientation, where we were told that we are a select few people who will have this honor of standing in this place. I'm saying that for the people who look towards all of us on every single side of this House to find hope. This bill does not provide me with hope. This provides me with fear, because it's coming after a slew of other bills that have unilaterally changed the face of Ontario. In 4 years, we may not even know what the impact, the full impact of these changes will be. That to me is chilling, because I have children that want to come here and experience Ontario in a way that would be supportive, and yet the rules could change in the midst of the game. And then there could be a decision that in the municipality of Waterloo, everything is different once again. I don't know how to go home and explain that to my kids. I don't know how to explain to my children that it's okay for the government in 2018 to unilaterally change the rules of the game in the midst of an election. Because it took a long time for me to explain to my children that this is what the election process actually is. I also, while I'm doing that, because it's 1984, I have to go back and explain to my children that there's some kind of rationale, which I can't quite understand, for going backwards 20 years in the sex ed curriculum, that there's some kind of rationale for going backwards when it comes to saving the environment, that there's some kind of rationale for going backwards when it comes to true reconciliation. And that's just a few of the things that I have to now take some time to figure out how to explain. I'm also extremely worried about what this says for leadership in Ontario. And this is me just taking a step back and thinking about how we demonstrate strong leadership. I had mentioned this before, and I can't help but say it again. It doesn't matter how many people are sitting around the table in a city council. It really doesn't matter. It's about what we understand to be leadership. Is it one person at the helm who has all the power that can change the rules? Or is there a decision that we're going to speak across the table, across our interests, engage in debate, and actually be open to changing our minds? For me, and for many of the people that are in the NDP caucus, leadership, true, authentic leadership, is actually being open to listening to what people have to say. What's worrisome to me is that embedded within Bill 5, Mr. Speaker, is not that. I don't know how to stand behind Bill 5 with integrity, because there's nothing that I can hold on to that allows me to understand why the changes are happening. And part of my integrity comes with being able to have a clear rationale, not just promise made, promise kept, because when we say that, there's nothing that explains why the promise was made in the first place. It's like when I'm talking to my children and one child tries to take something from the other child, because I have 3 of them, and I have to say, it's time to say sorry. Do they just say sorry, or do they actually explain what it is that they did, what the impact was, and understand internally why they won't do it again? Unfortunately, I feel like I have to make this point to the government. I think that it's important for us to be able to explain why we're making the change, what the impact is that we hope to have, not a decrease of numbers. They can change all the numbers that they want. But what is the impact? What's the difference? And answer what the other people are actually saying the impact will be to them, which is kind of my last little bit of this discussion. One of the things that I've learned doing equity work is that it really doesn't matter what I say or what I put on paper. It doesn't matter if I put doctor before my name or if I ask people to say Miss or if I say MPP. If the people, Mr. Speaker, that I'm speaking to don't understand what I'm saying, I have more work to do. It's not them that have to pull up their socks, it's me. And that's leadership. And so if there are a group of people, whether it's 10 people or just one, that says, I don't understand, my job, because I take my position of leadership seriously and I walk with integrity and dignity, is to find a different way to explain it so that they can understand. But that's if I actually want them to know what it is that I'm doing and why. And so we're back to square one. But guess what? There's hope. I've been dying to actually put this on the record. The Pulitzer Prize, isn't this great? There's enough time, 8 long minutes. The Pulitzer Prize, which was first awarded in 1917, is awarded for achievements in newspapers, magazines, online journalism, literature, musical compositions, In 2018, Kendrick Lamar was awarded the Pulitzer Prize for his album called Damn, which documented the African American experience in the U.S. It was something that they had never done before. If the Pulitzer Prize can make a decision, the judges of the Pulitzer Prize can decide this kind of music, rap, and this kind of topic, the realities of fear and pain and desire for love and humanity of Black people in 2018 can actually be considered excellence, then I want to believe, I'm going to breathe real deep now, I want to believe that this government in 2018 can pull themselves up by their bootstraps and decide to listen, to govern with integrity, to actually be awarded like a Pulitzer Prize of governing. Wow. That's on the record. Yeah. I think that it's important for us to be honest. If people aren't, I think if people aren't willing to take a step back and actually listen, so Mr. Speaker, I'm not really supposed to be paying attention, but I actually want to pay attention to what was just said there. It could be that I'm not listening, or it could be that I am. It could be that he's not listening either. Doesn't really matter. The point is this: how do we want to lead in Ontario? That's my question. It doesn't matter. How do we want to lead? I want to lead with integrity, and I will keep doing that whether they yell slogans at me, with or without a buck of beer. I will stand up. I will stand up and I will speak my truth, and I will speak the truth of the people that I represent. And nobody heckling will change that. What I'm hopeful for is that they will choose to do the same. That while they sit in their caucus, Mr. Speaker, and they discuss the impact of what's happened, that they're honest, that they don't ignore me, that they don't ignore my voice or my ideas, and that one day I get into my office and there's a knock on the door from one of my colleagues across the way. Right? And they come on by and they say, you know what? You were talking about 1984. Do you have a copy of that there book in your office? I'd like to sit down and start a book club because we could talk it out. And I think that that's part of what we're supposed to be doing. I think that there are a long line of us who have somehow been involved in politics and felt that it has to happen a particular way, that they can't or shouldn't or don't want to listen to what other people are saying. And I believe that we can do differently. If the Pulitzer Prize can be awarded to Kendrick Lamar, then I believe that we can find a way to govern, even in the midst of the complete and utter chaos that Bill 5 just might create. And so, with 4 more minutes on the clock, I think that it's time for us to think a little bit about the importance of honesty. So, when I'm leading, there are going to be moments when I have to do things that, let's say, go back to my children, that my children don't necessarily want me to do. Because I'm the adult in the family, I sometimes have to make them go to the dentist and they don't want to go to the dentist, or go to the doctor and they don't want to go to the doctor. I can choose to force them to go, drop them off, have them yell, and that's the way I'm going to lead. Or I can sit them down and explain the benefits. All people are asking for, not just in Toronto, but across Ontario, is for the government to sit down and show us the benefits, talk to us. When regular people who are struggling to survive on ODSP, which hasn't been increased fully, so it's a cut, but maybe it's not a cut, but that's the Ministry of Truth, so we'll talk about that later. As my people say, stick a pin. The reality is that when we end up struggling on our day-to-day with the last $5 that we have in our pockets, the large spewing of discussions around $25 billion literally mean nothing. Yeah. I don't understand that. And that's the reality. So how else can we explain the benefit? In a way that allows me to actually engage, so that I could then tell my colleagues, or I could tell my friend, or I could talk to my family, or most importantly, because the government has made it very clear that parents are the best educators, that I can tell my kids. I'm telling you that with my doctorate in education, I cannot sit down with my children and explain to them anything that the government is doing right now. Not because I don't want to. That's why we ask the questions. But because there's no clarity.
Or answers.
There's no answers, and that's the honesty piece that I feel is lacking. I honestly want to be able to tell my children that they don't have to worry tomorrow. Unfortunately, I have to be worried because I don't know what's happening tomorrow. And with Bill 5, that's probably how a lot of people felt who had put their name forward to actually run for the first time. After getting a whole support network around them, as we all did to be here, they had to now figure out what they were going to do next. That level of uncertainty is really frightening. And it requires, again, if we want to be strong leaders, Mr. Speaker, it requires us to rebuild that trust. So my other question for the government is, how do we rebuild the trust? How do you rebuild the trust after Bill 5 is going to come after we forced a bunch of students back to work at York, right? After we've decided that unilaterally we're going to have a plan to have a climate change plan. Not the plan,
no details,
but just a discussion about the potential of having a plan uninterrupted. Even that doesn't make sense. And now we have Bill 5 saying, in some places, maybe sometimes you'll be able to elect somebody, and no discussion of how a decision will be made in the places where there is no election. How do I know who will be put into the leadership position in Niagara or in Peel? How do I know? And how can I trust when there's been this level of uncertainty and chill? How do I trust? I can't imagine that anybody here would tell their children to trust this, and I know that I can't tell mine. So my hope is that there will be a knock on the door, and somebody somewhere will show up. What room am I in? 170. Come and talk to me and explain to me. Somebody will explain to me what it is that we're trying to do. And I would be more than willing, it's part of my job, to provide some insight in the kinds of things that I on the ground would want to see, to start to rebuild that trust, piece by piece by piece. Taking a minute and saying we're going to review this before we move forward would be one of the first steps in actually taking seriously the concerns that have come into this House. Thank you.
Thank you very